Okay, hello everyone. I'd like to welcome you to Future You, How to Build a Career in Environmental Sustainability. My name is Elizabeth Schiltz, and I'm the Director of Communications at the Canada Foundation for Innovation, or as we typically call it, the CFI. First, I'd like to mention that the CFI respectfully recognizes and acknowledges the traditional relationship that the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis across Canada have with the land all Canadians share. Before we get started, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the CFI and why we're actually doing this webinar series. So the CFI is a funding organization that invests in research labs, equipment, and facilities on campuses across the country. This includes everything from DNA sequencers, lasers, and electron microscopes to larger scale infrastructure like ocean tracking networks, radar systems, and research vessels. We funded almost 13,000 projects over 27 years. So you can imagine that many of the research projects you can think of in Canada probably somehow use the infrastructure we have funded. You may even know some on your own campuses. The investments we make help attract top researchers to Canada and equip them to be global leaders in their fields. Access to cutting-edge research labs and tools allows them to respond to emerging challenges like the pandemic, food security, and climate change and environmental sustainability. This is the area we're going to focus on for today. So why are we doing these webinars? The labs we support also serve as training grounds for students. They are spaces where undergrads and grad students conduct research, meet their mentors, and gain skills they can use to build their careers. In fact, each of the panelists we have with us today and our moderator have spent time working in a CFI-funded lab. And as you'll find out, they have all gone on to work in rewarding careers. As an organization, we recognize the value of this kind of training and hope to inspire students to see the same. So let's get started. I want to mention one bit of housekeeping before I introduce our moderator. We're leaving as much time as possible for panelists to answer your questions. So if you have a particular question you think of as you listen to the discussion, please write it in the Q&A section you see at the bottom of your screen. We will endeavor to get to as many of these as possible during the time we have. Now, I would like to pass it over to our moderator, Catherine Girard. Catherine is an assistant professor of microbiology at l'Université du Québec à Chicoutimi. Her research focuses on the microbial ecology of ice in the Arctic and how climate change will alter landscapes and ecosystem function. So she is obviously very well positioned to lead this discussion today with our four very interesting panelists who are all working in environmental fields. So thank you again for joining us today, and over to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and thanks to everyone in the audience for joining us for this webinar. I am very pleased to be the moderator for today's discussion with our exciting group of panelists. So as Elizabeth mentioned, I'm a researcher. I'm based in Chicoutimi in Quebec, and I'm interested in how the ecology of microbes changes with climate change. So climate change and sustainability are deeply connected, and for me, microbes are one of the key actors at this interplay. And throughout my training in STEAM, I was always really fascinated by biodiversity conservation and how microbiology and ecology research could lead to sustainable solutions at the local, but also at the global scale. So I'm really pleased to be here with you today to moderate this panel on careers in environmental sustainability. And I'm really happy to get to spend the next hour with you and our wonderful panelists who have careers in this sector from all across Canada. So I would like to introduce our four panelists for today. So first we have Nina Dmytrenko, who is a green home expert at the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation in Ottawa. Hello, Nina. We also have Michelle D'Souza, a biodiversity specialist who is a research and innovation manager at McCain Foods in Florenceville, Bristol, New Brunswick. Hi, Michelle. We're also welcoming Alan Lee, who is an agriculture lab manager at the Sustainable Agriculture Lab at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. Hi, Alan. And we have Graham Van Every, who is a sustainability consulting analyst at Quinn & Partners in Toronto, who helps large public companies reduce their greenhouse gas footprints. Hi, Graham. So thanks to all four of you for being here today. And I'd like to start by giving you, each of you, an opportunity to introduce yourselves and to share a bit about the journeys that led you to your respective fields. So One after the other, I'll invite our panelists to share on the paths that led them to their current work in environmental sustainability, and to tell us a bit about what experiences or which mentors supported them during this journey. And what does a day in the life of our panelists look like? So let's start with Nina, who again is a green home expert. Nina, could you take a few minutes and share with us your journey and tell us about what led you to your current work?
Thank you, Catherine. Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to speak with you today. And thank you, CFI, for organizing this inspiring series. And thank you to our participants for registering, attending, and showing the interest in this field, as well as, I think, an overall research topic. So I grew up in Ukraine in a very technical, in very analytical family. So my grandmas, they were physics teachers. My parents graduated with mathematics and computer science degrees. So I wanted to be like them, but I didn't want to do any programming because I didn't feel any connection with this. Between my parents, there was a little bit of rivalry whose university is better. So I was team dad. And he went to Kyiv Polytechnic Institute. So I wanted to go where he went. When in high school, we already started thinking in terms of, so which department, because it's not computer science, I will be going. And we had this conversation about energy, and that energy is an essential part of humankind, and future challenges will be about energy generation, storing, transportation. So here you go. I go to here heat and power engineering department, which in Canada would be simply called mechanical engineering. But in that particular department, there were so many sub branches where I could go, because all of the courses already pre-designed for you. You cannot pick and choose. So you have to select your path pretty much from year one. There was a lot of on combustion. There was also on nuclear, but in nuclear, there is a little bit gender limitations because for medical reasons, women cannot be on power plant, at least in Ukraine. This is the rule. So but I still wanted to do something about heat transfer. So I was thinking thermophysics would be my passion, would be my new passion. And this is where I could eventually branch out into renewable energy. That was my plan. So graduated first with bachelor's in applied science, then in master's in applied science. And then I developed a new dream. I wanted to study in a Western university and use those modern facilities that I dreamed about while doing my program back home. So this is how I ended up in University of Waterloo. I was there for a couple of semesters, took the classes that I thought would be able me to link to large network of labs in Canada that are working in renewable energy and solar in particular. So after 2 semesters, I switched to Carleton University to an amazing building performance research center, which is one of key, very strong groups in Canada that is doing research all about housing, including systems, innovative technologies, but also behavioral science behind people using buildings in a certain way, interacting with the technologies in a certain way. So it took me quite some time with some failures and successes to graduate. And because of my supervisor, I was able to get pretty quickly my first contract with federal government at CMHC. So since 2018, I've been at CMHC in the research department. And in terms of my day-to-day work, I will quickly give you a screenshot almost of a life cycle of all of my projects. So if you have any friends or colleagues or parents, family members from government, you probably, at least in research, you probably have heard that we like planning a plan. So once in a few years, we are planning a plan in terms of what we will be researching. So we're trying to understand current issues, challenges, or crises, and what would be the critical questions that we need to address to move forward with solves all of those problems. So once in a few years, we formulating those critical questions. And once the plan is done, we are creating projects that would be able to answer those questions. So we're developing the methodologies, we are predicting what would be the outcomes. And once we finally get those results, we are supporting our policy colleagues with the evidence we generate. And we also communicating those results to the general public in trying to influence whoever we can to move towards more towards greener housing, so that our GHG emissions going down, that we are developing much more energy efficient building stock, and we are preserving it. And we're also trying to create somewhat resilient building stock considering the current realities of the climate.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Nina, for sharing. Next, I would like to invite Michelle to share a bit of her journey with us. Michelle, how did you become a research and innovation manager at McKean Foods?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to tell this story. It's always a privilege to be able to share that experience and share that journey, because especially for me, it wasn't a very typical one. My family comes from India, but I've kind of grown up all around the world. So spent a significant time in the Middle East during my early years, going back and forth from there to India. So I very much come from a rural Indian family. I spent a lot of my early life running around barefoot in like nature. That was what I loved to do. So the second light came out, I was out there and I'd come back for dinner. Messy, dirty, living the general Jungle Book life. That was all I ever wanted. And I think that really informed a lot of my passion. I found peace and solace and just joy being out in the world. My family immigrated to Canada 23 years ago now, and changed a lot of the way I approach things, largely because now all of a sudden I'm in a very different environment. Culture is very different. Started understanding and trying to understand how I fit in a very new world. And one thing that kind of grounded me was valuing education. It was always something that was very, very important in my family. And I had an older sister who was following the footsteps of my dad, being an engineer. So ended up at Waterloo, a really important engineering school. One of the things that I learned from her experience at Waterloo was how valuable co-op is, a cooperative program. So Waterloo being one of the largest universities for this, I followed suit, just realizing how valuable it was to get actual hands-on experience with a job. I didn't really have a clear understanding of what I wanted to do at that point. I knew I loved nature, and that was really about it. And when I told my dad I wanted to do biology, he's like, what kind of a job would you get doing biology? And that's a really hard question to answer coming from an Indian family. He's like, so you're going to be a doctor, right? Like that's really, if you're going into life sciences, that's where you go. I knew that wasn't for me. I think I had an aha moment once while watching a documentary where my dad took me to this museum. It's one of those 4D IMAX experiences. And it was about divers going down into like the crevices of these underwater thermals and collecting bacteria. And I'm watching this like surrounded. I'm like, that's it. That's what I want to do. I want to be able to go into the tiny little crevices of the earth and understand and connect with life. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to do biology. I also had a very analytical background, or a passion, I guess. So I chose biochemistry. Thought that would be a really good middle ground. Typically, I think a biochemist, if you think of the jobs one goes to, you're going to go into something like the pharmaceutical industry, toxicology, a really nice middle. So I got the chance to work a diversity of jobs through my co-op program. And right about at my last one, I worked for a toxicology lab, and I did really, really incredible research. However, that required testing on animals. It quickly broke my soul. I realized that was not for me. And I think that was a really, really good turning point, but because I was like, okay, this isn't for me. I need to shift gears or I'm not going to stay in this field. And I made a really bold decision, I think, in the last year of my co-op, where I said, I'm not going to work for money. I'm going to go out to the most remote place that I can think of and do field work. I ended up in Central America, in Honduras specifically, and I found a professor who was going to sponsor that effort, specifically using a technology called DNA barcoding. It was the first time I'd ever heard of it, but it was an opportunity for me to go and once again go crawl through a forest and do some research. So my two worlds kind of aligned. I absolutely loved it, absolutely adored it. So I did an undergraduate thesis in that experience, had a really great time, met lots of really great people, found my passion again, and very quickly realized I wanted to work for the organization that sponsored that opportunity. And at that point, the professor who had supported me said to me, well, if you're going to go and work for them and support them doing research, why would you not do a master's? At that point, I had not considered grad school. I was not the type of person who thought that was for me, but I saw his point. Why not? If I'm going and supporting other people to do research, why don't I do it myself? And at that point, he's like, I know just the guy for you. Go and meet Paul Hebert. I didn't know at that time Paul Hebert was the father of DNA barcoding. I didn't know at the time that the advisor that I was actually doing my undergraduate thesis was his old PhD student. So here I go to Guelph now, and I'm sitting in the office with Paul, and I'm telling him what I love and what I care about. And he's like, yep, sure, perfect. If you want to do a master's, I'm fully supportive. I was like, okay, let's give this a go. And I got thrust into this world of DNA. And not just DNA, but got indoctrinated into the Center for Biodiversity Genomics at the University of Guelph. So it's a really fabulous institution that not only facilitates the growth of DNA barcoding, but really builds the infrastructure and the community. This is where CFI has come into my life at this point. And so for me, it was really finding that passion and finding the tool to help conserve those places that I felt so intimately connected to. And that eventually led me to McCain, because what I understood at that point was this tool can be used in various different ways. And what McCain wanted to do is use this tool to understand and inform more sustainable agriculture. So I thought that was a really exciting challenge, and that's what led me to McCain. And my day-to-day now, and I'll get a little bit more into this in the follow-up questions, I'll put you a little teaser though. So I worked with McCain as a consultant for a few years until I finally was able to secure a position just this past year. It was a position that was designed for me, and it really allows me to integrate my experience with research, the international community, a global perspective into how to tackle really large problems. And so that's kind of my day-to-day. So I work on a global team, and I work with regional departments to help understand how we can make sustainable choices in agriculture with all of the nuance that's needed to address it in every single region or country. So that's my day-to-day.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. And I understand. I definitely got caught up in science when I first heard about DNA barcoding as well. It is extremely cool. I get it. So thank you for sharing, Michelle. Next, Alan, could you tell us a little bit about your journey, about your background, and what led you to now being a sustainable agriculture lab manager?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, for one. I guess it's pretty funny so far that, we have this theme of trying to get into engineering, because it's definitely something that happened on my end too. I grew up, well, I guess we immigrated, in 2001 to Canada. I grew up in Lower Mainland BC in the suburbs, so I know nothing about agriculture. All I see is pretty much, once in a while a documentary pops up on TV and whatnot. I really liked watching, Animal Planet and Discovery at the time. It comes up once in a while, I think around, I want to say, either in the mornings before going to school or right after classes. You come back and you watch TV and all that good stuff. But yeah, no, high school at the time, it was, family members. They're all engineers. My brother was, applying to an engineering school and whatnot. I thought to myself, hey, why not? Let's apply to engineering. It seems pretty fun. I have the grades for it. Why not? And then as a backup, I was like, I like animals and plants. They're really fun things to, interact with. So let's just put that as a backup. Who would have thought that I didn't get into engineering at all? So I took my backup, and I started taking courses there. And of course, being from zero agricultural background and going to a school that is basically an agricultural school, University of Alberta in Edmonton is a really big agricultural school. All my classmates are farmers, actually. It's a really interesting experience there. And there's this course in the U of A called ANSI 200 where it primarily deals with farm animals, but at the same time, the professors were pushing very hard for researchers or even students to interact with producers at the time. So I had this opportunity to talk with producers and talk about what their griefs and challenges are in the animal agricultural industry. And this was the time when I was like thinking to myself, being a researcher, you really should understand what your producers need. But, given that that wasn't exactly what I was interested in, I kept on taking more courses. And I think in first year, I also took a soil sciences course where the teachers there and the TAs were super passionate about looking at, blocks of dirt. And, at the time it was, weird. I've never touched dirt soil before, really. So touching it, playing around with it, and seeing how it changes as you do different things to it, like using the ribbon method to figure out what the texture is, putting some calcium carbonation on it to see if there's calcium in the soil and all that good stuff. It was very chemistry. It was very physics. It was pretty much everything in engineering that I enjoyed more than engineering itself. So I kept on pushing forwards to it. I got an internship working in a private agricultural firm. I got a chance to work in a lab at the U of A as well. And at the time when I was working, I had ideas of what I wanted to see. I wanted to learn more about this ecosystem called soil. And that pushed really hard into what I was thinking. And I met this supervisor in the private firm who had plenty of projects going on. And one day we were just sitting out at the farm looking at a plot going, hey, this is wonderful. This is really beautiful. We have results that would have not made sense if we didn't start studying it. We kept talking about it and we came up with a project. And at the time, I didn't think about doing masters. There's no reason for me to do a master's. I just wanted to work and see research. So I think I brought that idea up to a professor that I knew at the U of A, told him, hey, there's a project that I think is interesting. Here's a project. You can do whatever you want with it. But I wanted you to know about it because my supervisor can't take this on. Who would have thought that the person that I told it to would be like, why don't you just do a master's? There's no reason for you not to. And both of them actually, because the person became my co-supervisor afterwards from that place, and we ended up finishing that master's, and it solidified me being very passionate about soils. It was so much things that you could see from all that research. The research and the soil came together, and I started looking for positions where I can do both, which was an agronomist position, and that somehow landed me at the University of British Columbia working as a lab coordinator for pretty much the exact thing that I wanted to do. Now, in terms of day-to-day, on season is the best time because every day would be me going out into the field sampling and bringing the samples back. So when you're out in the field, you get to see a lot of fun stuff, And of course, on the off season where we're processing, we also get to see a lot of things. We get to use equipment, really fancy equipment from the labs, which I will talk about a little bit later. And it's a lot of planning too, actually, because when you're trying to have projects, everything is about planning, and you have to talk with all of your stakeholders about what you want to get out of that. And last but not least, as a lab coordinator, I train pretty much everybody from grad students to student workers in my lab. And that is my day-to-day.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alan. So it sounds like you're becoming quite the mentor yourself in your new position. So finally, I would like to invite Graham, who is a sustainability consulting analyst, to share a bit with us. So Graham, could you tell us how you came to work in sustainability and what your day-to-day life looks like at work?
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you everyone for being here and looking forward to speaking with everyone. A little bit about myself. I grew up just outside of Sudbury in Northern Ontario. So growing up in that area, I soon realized if I didn't have hobbies that involved being outside, I probably wasn't going to have hobbies at all. Pretty much everyone around there, our hobbies were being out on the lake, hiking, doing something outdoors. So I think that's where my passion for environmental sustainability really began. And then fast forward a few years, when I was in high school, I graduated high school, really had no idea what I wanted to do, but I knew that I liked math and science, and I knew that engineering was a degree that combined both of those subjects, but also was very employable. So I figured if I go get an engineering degree, I can work on some things that maybe I like, but even if I don't like it, in the end, I'll have a degree that's employable and I can get a job and go wherever I'd like. So I settled on chemical engineering at McMaster. Chose chemical engineering because I always thought it was fun when people would have conversations about we should power the world on nuclear energy or cars should run on natural gas or something like that. I always found those conversations exciting, and chemical engineering was something that tackled that. So that's why I chose chemical engineering. I ended up really, really enjoying my degree just by sheer luck. It ends up being something I really liked. A couple years in, when I was in third year, I had a really great opportunity fall into my lap. One of my professors, who I honestly didn't even know knew my name, emailed me out of the blue and said, "Hey, would you like to come work in my lab? We have a spot for a new undergraduate student. If you're interested, come by and check it out." So I knew I had to say yes to that opportunity. Eventually went and started working in this professor's lab. We primarily focused on treating wastewater. And it was a very practical lab. So the lab had a lot of private companies that would hire us in the lab to essentially, we would take their wastewater and then we would come up with sort of a pilot way to treat that wastewater on the lab scale and then say, okay, this is what you should actually do in the field. These are the types of technologies that you should look at to accomplish what you're looking for. So worked in that lab for a number of years. That made up my summer jobs for about 3 years of university. Then when I finished my undergraduate degree, I was asked to stay on and do a master's, and I really heavily considered it. I eventually ended up saying no, not because I didn't like the work, but because I was actually a really poor experimentalist. Like I did not have the knack for lab work like everyone else in my lab did. So I figured if I was going to get a job that I'd be successful at, it'd have to be something that I have some natural ability in. So moved on to industry, but I used my lab experience to do so. Because we were working with private companies, I had some connections. So I ended up going to work for one of the companies that our lab had been hired by. That company was called Energia. They were a renewable energy project developer. So I started out in the sustainability department, documenting the emissions that our company produced, as well as the emissions that our company avoided. Got to write this sustainability report for the company that was eventually published and given out to investors. And then shortly thereafter that was published, I hopped on over to the company that I work at now, which is called Quinn & Partners. We are consultants that help companies all across the world, many of whom are large public companies. We help them disclose what their greenhouse gas emissions footprint is and help them identify investments that will be good for the world and will be successful in a net zero future. So my day-to-day today is pretty busy. A lot of different client calls, a lot of spreadsheets. I do a lot of emissions accounting where I'm knee-deep in Excel. Very different from what I used to do in the lab, but I absolutely would not be here without my lab experience. So happy to be here and happy to be chatting with all of you today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Graham, for sharing. Thanks to all four of you for telling us a bit about your training, your experiences, and where you're at right now. So for this next segment of the webinar, we're going to delve a little bit deeper into how you got here and why your work in environmental sustainability is important. And maybe, Graham, we could chat about this first question with you, just because you mentioned that you were not a natural experimentalist from what you just shared, but you did gain a lot from your work in a lab during your university years. So could you tell us a bit more about what other skills or what experiences you gained during that time in the lab that helped you for what you do now?
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, and this might not be the same for everyone, but for me, working in a lab was like my first dose of the real world. Doing your courses at school, don't get me wrong, tremendously important. Take them very seriously and work hard. But in academic studies, you're you're taught how to do something in class, then you're given a set of information, and then you go solve a problem that you've previously been taught to do. When you're in a lab, that's really not the case. I can remember some days I would be sent something, I'd be sent this random lab sample. It doesn't have a label on it. There's this safety protocol I'm supposed to follow. I can't do that if I don't have a label. What do I do? So just learning to deal with ambiguity and an incomplete set of information, I really started doing that in the lab. And that's something I do all the time today. I work with incomplete information all the time. And when I started in a lab, I had incomplete information. Okay, I had to learn to build up some communication skills, learn who to ask when I have problems, learn how to ask those questions. Those are still things I do every day today. So I think a lot of it was just that real practical application of things that you had learned, and the lab was a great way to do that.
Oh, that's interesting. And people don't often associate science with creativity, but it's absolutely what you need to work in the lab to sort of push through the ambiguity and the incomplete information to chase that answer. Alan, you obviously spend a lot of time in the lab to this day. What parts of your training or your time in the lab when you were in university sort of helped you grow into what you do now?
Kind of funny. So at the U of A, I worked in 2 different labs, and I swear I wasn't in the lab about 90% of the time. But in terms of what I learned and what experiences I got from these labs, it's mostly, at least working as a lab technician, it's really important that things are timed. You know how long everything takes. And as a lab manager, now that I'm realizing it, it really is important to know exactly how long every sample takes. So that's the skill thing, is to actually make sure that you always know what every single step of the stuff takes. Now, in terms of actual skill sets that I learned from every one of those jobs, is when you take samples, there's a very particular way you should take it. Especially with soil. My second lab was a soils lab, which is quite literally the same as what I am working in right now. Soil science is very, very similar across pretty much all of the disciplines, whether it's biogeochemistry, microbial biology work, and all of that. You all need to do basic soil sampling to have a background, a baseline information. And so if anything I took away from that is learning how to take nutrient soil samples and bulk density. Surprisingly, I've been doing that pretty much for about 4 or 5 years now.
So
But
maybe
yeah,
techniques that you didn't initially think would be so crucial in your day-to-day.
yeah, those day-to-day things really it solidified all of the things I have to do. Basically from that one lab, actually. All of the techniques that I learned for that one lab has transferred pretty much completely over to what I'm currently working on right now.
Sounds like a good lab. But time management is absolutely one of the biggest skills that you can take away from this kind of course. And for someone in your position, I expect it's absolutely critical to operations.
Yeah, it's important so that the supervisor knows that they aren't overloading a project with time.
Excellent. And well, I mean, you guys, you we're hearing a lot of common themes about engineering and, enjoying being outside and everything, but you all have very different and distinct careers. And I'm wondering if some of you would like to share on what gets you pumped up about getting to work every morning. What gets you excited to get to work? And maybe Michelle, you'd like to take this one?
Yes, I would be happy to. When I really get down to it, I think there's a theme I have in my life, and it's I didn't really know how to really approach or what the best way to get about doing anything was. What I understood is that I had a passion from the very, very get-go for something specific. So nature, being in it, protecting it was my priority. The next thing that really, took hold was like, well, how do I get involved in that space? How do I get involved in that world? How do I do my best with my skills? And to this day, that's what excites me. So I've had a variety of different jobs. I've had a variety of different ways to approach that. But like at the heart of it, that's what it is for me. It's, am I getting up every day and am I speaking to that passion of mine, to that truth of mine. So like, first, I am super, super grateful and fortunate to have even understood at an early age what that was, because I think that really is a challenge for a lot of people. It's, what am I passionate about? Where are my gifts? How can I make a difference? And once I figured that part out, everything else was about, okay, well, what do I feel like doing today? What do I feel like doing this year? Where do I want to be in 5 years? And how do I position my life and myself to approach that goal in a way that makes sense in my life right now? And for me, that is it. That's what gets me excited. As long as every day I wake up and I'm answering that question, then that's great. The spice is in the fact that every day the way I approach it is different, right? The way I connect with people is different. So when I'm in academia, I got the chance to ask people all around the world how they approach that. Now that I'm in industry, I get to look at it on a business side. So there's that for me is the exciting part, that there's really no one path to answering things that need to be answered, especially in the environmental sustainability space. And so you almost have to create that excitement for yourself. And yeah, I'm just really fortunate to have been able to do that.
I think that's a lovely way of framing it too, of this needing this constant, which for you was a passion for protecting nature and the environment, but also needing that spice to keep things interesting and challenging in your day-to-day. I think that's really well said. Alan, would you like to tell us a bit about what gets you going to get to work? What excites you about getting up every morning?
Ooh, I am not a morning waker, I can tell you this much. But on the on season, I can wake up as early as 3 o'clock in the morning just to get out and go work in the field. And why might that be? Can you imagine going out into a field, looking at the field, seeing your project, the whole treatment that you've put in actually start seeing effect? It looks all different and all that good stuff. And then when it starts blooming, especially in the agricultural field, when you work with things like, cover crops, when you work with, let's say your wheat, your peas, and whatever, you start seeing flowers, and those flowers are all different colors. So every day you come in, you see this really beautiful flower garden, essentially. That's a very big reason for why I wake up early for those seasons. And I guess in the off season, what really motivates me, kind of gets me out of bed, is when I'm very, very close to a result, especially when it's been about 2 or 3 weeks of processing. I'm tired. I just want to get analysis done, but I know that that day is going to come when the analysis comes, and I have really fascinating results from whatever I do, whether it's, the fact that our cover cropping treatment, where we added so many cover crops to the point where all we see is a jungle, has worked. Oh, that excitement comes in, and you just want to do more. You want to write more. You want to learn more about what you did. And that's what keeps me going anytime I wake up.
It sounds like the seasonality in your on and off season is really nourishing and gets you outside when the treatments are happening on the crops in the fields, but then you get to chase that curiosity in the lab and chase that result.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And I mean, science is certainly exciting, especially when you know that you're close to a result or you can actually see your treatments having an effect, but it's not always all dewy. There are some challenges to pursuing a job in the sciences or in the environmental sector. So I'm wondering if any of you would like to share on any setbacks or challenges that you may have faced in grad school or during your hunt for a career, and if you ever experienced any perspective changes or how you overcame these setbacks. So Nina, would you like to respond to this one?
Would love to. So through my grad school at Carleton, my research was not going at the pace I was expecting. I was not able to get the data I wanted. However, and at some point, it was almost like a devastating feeling that it's completely not the way I'm not achieving what I wanted to achieve, especially in that bigger picture. But afterwards, when I was successfully able to get a job, and actually see how much applicability of those failures are for like actual real life world with all of these challenges. Because when you surround yourself to like a lab environment where everything is controlled, and then you are moving into real world, nothing is controlled anymore, everything is outside of your control, or a lot of things, like you can be overwhelmed. But I was already overwhelmed during grad school, during my research. So I think at the end, as if I'm looking at these things right now, especially as a federal government employee, where I see how massive those problems are and how difficult it's to find solutions and then apply them across Canada, I understand that all of those failures, they were actually not failures. I just needed to convert them into lessons learned, insights, and also how they were able to help me to develop like resilience to those things. So as long as whatever you're going through in grad school in particularly, try to remember about big picture. Like elements that you feel like devastating end of life situations, they might be not, as long as you are able to analyze them and pull something extremely useful. And then afterwards, build your story based on those lessons learned instead of sequence, oh, I felt here, I felt there. It's not failures, just pull the lessons. As long as you're able to analyze and get that bigger picture and see how it fits into your path, whatever you're planning for yourself, that is a success story.
Well, that's a really fascinating perspective. And I think a lot of grad students sort of fall into the trap of tying their sense of self to what they're doing in the lab. And when that happens, if you fail at something, it makes it very, very hard to work through. But what you just shared on, shifting this failure into a lesson and understanding that, in the real world, we do lack control, and that's okay. And how can we push through? I think that's really inspirational. Thank you, Nina. Michelle, would you like to contribute maybe to this question? Any setbacks or challenges that you overcame, or something to share?
Yeah, I like what Nina said about resilience, and I think I very much can relate to that particular word. Graduate school is not for everyone. I didn't think I needed it. I got thrust into the world, and I absolutely adored and loved the challenge of it, but it is a challenge. And you commit a lot of yourself and a lot of your time and a lot of energy into this world and space. And sometimes if you don't have a perspective of how you connect to the larger picture or the larger problem, which I think just in general academics struggle with sometimes, it can get really hard. You can lose a little bit of yourself in the process. And academia just in itself is a very, very different place today than it was back in the day, right? So back in the day, you got into grad school to become a professor, to do research. The numbers of graduate students who even get an opportunity to go down that path anymore is low, and it is discouraging. And just in general, there's a lack of stability, right? So once you finish grad school, then you're a postdoc, and if you're lucky, you become an assistant professor, but like there's a reality in which you can be a postdoc for way too long. And postdocs are 2-year positions, you're shifting, you're going from different countries, different research projects, you got to be versatile. I keep hearing this, like, you never want to do your postdoc or you do your PhD or you do your master's, you want to like diversify. And that just in general, for me, initially was great. When I started, I didn't need stability. I wanted excitement. I wanted to see every corner of the world. Oh, a different project in 2 years? Perfect. Sign me up. I was in, I got to go to South Africa. I got to go to Nunavut. I got to do projects in some pretty incredible places. But then I shifted. The lack of stability did end up impacting me at one point. And it took me a really hard time to understand that that's okay and that my boundaries are shifting. And what are my boundaries? What am I comfortable giving up now for that excitement versus that stability? And I think that's really, really important to understand. One, that it's dynamic in your life. It's going to change. It's going to shift. You might fall in love. You might have kids. There's like so many things that happen in your life. And it shouldn't be a bad thing. Like, know your boundaries, move forward. And it's okay to completely shift directions. I struggled a lot with, oh my God, I spent X amount of years in academia, and now I find myself in industry and I'm looking at people younger than me who are in such high positions. I'm like, I could have done that. I could have, you know, just started here. And that's such a dangerous way to look at life. I need to value all of that journey, all of the path, all of my learnings, and that perspective. I wish I had sooner.
Yeah, I think that's really important, this resiliency, and that grad school is many things, but it's also not really good at showing us paths that are not in this tenure track academic, you know, pipeline, and accepting that this might not be what you want to do is really important when you're in that system, and not always easy. So thanks, Michelle, for sharing.
No problem.
This next question I'd like to direct to Graham. So you told us a bit about your work as a sustainability analyst, and I'm wondering, how did you jump from you know, your training in engineering to your career? What first steps did you take to sort of transition from grad school or university into your current position?
Yeah, I think the first thing is I used my academic studies to learn what I liked, and I think this is a theme that applies to a lot of people on this call. Like for myself, I started doing research. I valued the experience tremendously, but I knew that I wasn't all that good at it. For Alan, for example, Alan started doing research and was clearly very good at it and has now found a successful career pathway on that side of things. So I think my first piece of advice to anyone would just be approach everything in STEAM with your head held high. Have an understanding like, hey, this might not be easy. I might not like it, but as long as I'm learning along the way, it's going to be value to me in the long run. And then the second thing that was huge for me was just leveraging my connections. Like I talked about earlier, how coming out of university, I used a connection that I'd made in the lab to get a job. And it's funny, like I remember applying to probably 20 or 30 jobs out of school. And the one that I got was the one where I only had to send someone an email with my resume in it. And that was pretty much the extent of the effort that I had to put into it. So use your connections for sure, and try to be strategic along the way about meeting people who can maybe help you out down the road. But I would definitely caution that it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to use your connections to get a job. You can use your connections just to help you in general. If you're working in STEAM, chances are you're surrounded by some pretty successful people, and don't be afraid to ask those people like, hey, what advice would you give to someone at this stage of their career? When you found your job, how did you know that it was what you liked? What would you do if you were in my position? How would you best prepare yourself? Even little things like that can be tremendously helpful. And generally speaking, in STEAM, people are pretty kind, pretty humble, and pretty willing to help people out. So don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help, because it can always be invaluable.
Yeah, that's really important advice, because connections, when we think connections, we often think networking or attending conferences, but it's so much more than that. It's interacting day to day with people who are close with us and who are part of the supportive community of STEAM. So yeah, I think that's really great advice. And I think this brings us really nicely to one of the big themes of today's webinar, which is mentorship. What role do mentors play in your paths, or how does one find a mentor? How does a mentor support us? So maybe Michelle, if you could share a bit about your experience with your mentors and how they were important in your training.
I would love to. So I definitely mentioned one of my key mentors, Paul Hebert. And I think, you know, especially when you're in grad school, that's a really clear and easy mentor to usually, especially when you go into grad school, you pick that person, you make an informed decision about them. And there's, you know, loads and loads of things that I would encourage you to do well when you're actually thinking of that space. And I was really, really fortunate, and I chose someone who supported my strengths and my skills, and that's really important. But, you know, I want to touch on a little bit of I guess, more in line with the kind of what Graham was just saying. Your connections and your mentors don't always have to be this thing that you like make concrete decisions about. Sometimes, like, going in and understanding that connection is really the thing in and of itself is such a valuable thing. You don't always have to have an end goal. You don't always have to approach a person saying, I want you to be my mentor. And a perfect example I can give is one of my cherished mentors is Hannah James. So when I met her, she was working in communications at the University of Guelph, and she approached me because she wanted to do a little bit of a comms piece on one of the projects that I was working on. And since then, that relationship has just blossomed into this beautiful thing, because what she made me realize is that communicating my research was this like hidden piece that I just did not put legs on and I didn't understand. And we just had this wonderful conversation, and kind of like a little shout back out to, watching that documentary that inspired it all. I was like, this is the stuff that allows people to get excited about nature and connect with it a little bit personally, where they may not have had the opportunity. And all of a sudden, I, went down this path of also loving and passionately wanting to be a science communicator. And that was nothing I would have ever expected that I could ever do. And it happened because I kept my heart open to it, I guess. So yeah, I think mentors can come and find you in these like really beautiful ways, and stay open to that.
And mentorship can come in many different facets, and it's not just your PI or your advisor who's important. And I think what you just shared, shows the importance of sort of seeing the spark of science and of knowledge through someone else's eyes is really powerful. And you got to see your work under a totally different lens. So I could see how that would certainly open your eyes.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, exactly.
So I would like to ask maybe a couple of more questions before we move on to the Q&A. And this one, maybe for Nina, I'd like to know what value you see for your line of work for Canada. What kind of satisfaction do you draw from working in the energy sector and in clean housing?
So I think this is part of being a government employee in research. The work we do is supposed to improve lives of all Canadians. So you immediately connect to something so meaningful. Like you know that all of your successes will be shared with so many more people across Canada. So creating the research that is applicable, meaningful, that you are trying to solve some very real problems. It's what gives the joy every day. It makes the work meaningful. And earlier today, we actually, as a research division, we were going through a training, and we were given an example about Project Aristotle from Google, where they were trying to understand some common themes for successful teams, like high-performing teams. And two things were mentioned as a discovery through that project. It's impact, so like feeling that your work matters overall, and also second thing is that that work has a personal meaning for yourself. So and like some people can say, oh, it's identical thing, it's not two different discoveries, but to me it is two, because on one hand, back to like our results will impact Canadians. This is the target. And also, like we specifically say, it's about particularly vulnerable populations. So we are not going after money. We're actually trying to make solutions that most vulnerable populations need, and they do not have capacities, they don't have resources. So we have the responsibility of supporting them as much as possible. That's one. But second one, about personal meaning for me, like I've been doing research around energy for 12 years in universities. And then afterwards, the applicability of that research in energy was used in housing sector. So I transferred it, but I was always thinking about, we do need to reduce energy consumption. So like generally reduce consumerism and create those more efficient ways of either generating energy or distributing energy or using energy. So to me, it was through my entire university, like, was a passion. Like, we have to, like, and it's not somebody told me to do so or be interested. It's connecting with those things that speak to you. So my work truly speaks to my values and beliefs. That is my religion. So climate change is overwhelming problem. Housing is overwhelming problem in Canada. But every day you're working on something that you know that it is maybe a tiny bit, but it is towards the direction of solving those major problems. So that's how I see my value in this larger organization, in this larger problem set.
Yeah, it's really important having, the knowledge that your research is meaningful and has impact. But above finding personal meaning, I think is a really important point that you make, and maybe applies also to people who are maybe in more fundamental research and less applied. You have to find that personal meaning to make it all make sense. Thanks, Nina. Maybe just one last question before we move on to the Q&A, and I'd like to direct this one to Alan. Could you offer a bit of practical advice on how you went about finding your job? Did you look for job opportunities? Did you have to apply to many different places? How did you get your foot in the door, basically?
Oh man, this was a really fun time for me, actually. That was I went into my master's straight out of my bachelor, so I didn't really have a chance to get a proper job or anything before then. So right out of my master's, I was basically at the end of the COVID pandemic. So I I was trying to get a job in agronomy, and one of the biggest issues then was, well, moving back home to BC, it was really hard to find a job in agronomy because Lower Mainland BC isn't exactly known for having agricultural specialists being hired, just because there's so many agronomic products that there's not actually a firm that can deal with all of them. So I started applying in Alberta, in the interior, and unfortunately, not that much luck because there's already specialists there. I'm not as special as I thought I would be. So I started looking for a little bit more entry-level jobs. In fact, things that don't even require a bachelor's, just a high school diploma. Basically, I ended up working at ES Crop Consult as a crop scout for a year, just to kind of get my feel of what agriculture was like in BC. And at the time, I also kept on applying to jobs, which eventually led me to working at UBC. But if there's any advice I'd say to give to people that are trying to apply for a job, it's keep on applying to things that you think you like and keep on applying to different levels of the position, whether it's entry level to advanced. Now, I didn't get any advanced ones, but I've been told that even if the condition of the job posting has more qualifications it wants than what you can give, still apply to them in case they ever have this, lack of applicants with the proper qualifications.
Yeah, so really don't box yourself in depending on the level of the position, but really use what you want to do, what you actually enjoy doing as the main deciding factor. That's great advice. Yeah. Thank you, Alan. Well, thank you all for those really insightful comments. I have one last question for our panelists, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. So I'd like to quickly remind everybody who's connected to the Zoom to please enter any questions that you may have using the Q&A function. I'm sure you all have questions as well for our panelists. No, so for my last question, this is similar to what you just shared, Alan, but I'll ask you for one other piece of advice. So for all of you, I'd like to know what guidance you would offer to students who are right now in university or in college that are considering careers in environmental fields. Is there one piece of advice that you would share with them that could help them be successful on this journey? And so I'd like to hear from all of you on this. So let's start with Nina. What one bit of advice would you like to share?
I have one and a half. So one, to reiterate, it's on resilience, like be resilient, take your failures, convert them into learnings. But the second one, it's when specifically those who are choosing the grad school and lab and where they will be doing research, like choose carefully the university, the lab, and the supervisor. In grad school, it's so incredibly important to find a supervisor who is well established in your field, but also with who you can have good chemistry, because pretty much them and like this dynamic will determine your success to big extent. And maybe one more piece on the topic. So even though like it's very good to be quite fundamental, have the fundamental knowledge on something, but try to convert that fundamental knowledge in your very specific niche topic. So then eventually you will be expert or close to in one specific field. Because in my case, it was heat pumps for very many years. In Ukraine, I was studying heat pumps. I came to Carleton, I was studying heat pumps, and it was like new learnings and completely different from theoretical research to experimental research. But have fundamental knowledge because they can be applicable across very many different fields, just like my energy got applied in housing sector, but have the specific topic. Have your heat pumps.
Find your heat pump.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Nina. Michelle, one piece of advice you'd like to share with our audience who'd like to pursue a career in environmental fields?
Yeah, just listening to Alan speak earlier, I would like to say you are special. Like we are all special. There is such a large problem ahead of us. We have big things to address, big problems, like the sustainability of our planet. It's a huge problem, and there is a unique way that you contribute to solving this problem. So find out what that is and pursue it to your dying breath. Like that's my piece of advice. And don't get discouraged if the world doesn't fit that narrative right now, right? Create that space, demand that space, ask that job, create that job if it doesn't exist. And I wouldn't have been able to give you this advice before, but I'm going to tell you right now, it is absolutely possible. There's a shift happening and people want to address these big problems and they don't know how. So if you find your passion and you can understand the way that you can help solve that problem, then show people the job that you need to get to solving that problem.
Yeah, wonderful. So really create that space, I think, is really powerful advice, and learn to advocate for yourself because you are the best person for a job. You just have to find it. Thanks,
Okay.
Michelle. Alan, one piece of advice you'd like to share?
I feel like this is probably more relevant if you're still in school, but your professors are human as well. Please go meet those professors, go talk to them, go to their office hours. I personally, if I didn't go to those, office hours, if I didn't talk to my professors even, like coming off of class and whatever, I don't think I would have had this opportunity. It was literally the conversations you have with your professors, your TAs, and whoever around that area that tells you either whether you enjoy the subject or whether, the professor has some very interesting research that you might be interested in. And those are the connections that you end up making while you're at university.
Professors are people too. Yes, definitely. Don't hesitate to reach out and meet with these folks who may become mentors, even though they're not your direct advisor. Graham, one final piece of advice that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I'll echo what others have said in that do what you can to find your own opportunities. If there's something that you think that you like or that you think you can be good at, go find a way to make a job out of it. In your own time, start doing some research. What jobs are available in the area that I like? Try to think about who can I talk to, who can I ask, what can I do to sort of get my foot in the door and give myself an opportunity. And the second thing that I would say, and this is something Nina said, is be resilient. Have an understanding that the pathway is not linear. A lot of times you'll end up heading in a direction you maybe hadn't envisioned at some point, but that's okay. Whatever you do, just do it to the best of your ability. And if you work hard and if you keep at it for long enough, generally speaking, good things happen.
Well, that's really powerful advice, this resilience and accepting that paths can be non-linear, but lead you exactly where you need to be. and that can be an opportunity that you've tailor-made for yourself based on what you are passionate about and what you want to work on. Excellent. Thank you, Graham. And thanks to all 4 of you for these really, really useful pieces of advice. I'd like to move on now to a couple of questions we have in the Q&A. And this first question is about more advice for entering environmental fields. And this one is, hello, what advice may you have for students that aren't in a STEM program? So someone who would like to work in sustainability or for environmental work, but is not currently enrolled in STEM. What advice would you have for them?
I think I could touch on that. It's very fascinating to see that the lab I'm currently working for has a lot of students that aren't even remotely related to what we do here. They're just kind of interested. So if you're not in a STEM program and you want to work in this field, I think all you have to do is have a passion for it. You can learn the skills and learn the knowledge that you need for this after you've started working in the field. Especially in agriculture, right now, what we need for the most part is just have people learn more into it. There's, I wouldn't say I didn't learn a lot during my university years. I definitely did, but the things that are very applicable to what producers need isn't as complicated as what a researcher can offer. So if you want to work in the sustainable field and you have a very big passion for it, there's no place to do it than just to do it.
So maybe working from that passion and understanding that there is room to learn. Once you're employed, there is space to grow and understand what you maybe didn't learn in school.
There's always time to learn.
Always.
I have something to add to this. I think because sustainability is linked to climate change, and climate change, by just simply being such a large problem, it requires everybody to participate in solving it, whether you cognitively doing it as a researcher or policymaker or just a regular citizen. So understanding how regular citizens can do it, you probably need like a degree in psychology to understand how humans operate, how we can influence their behaviors and all of this. So in green buildings or generally high performance buildings, it's important factor to understand human factor. So in the lab at Carleton where I studied, we had a multidisciplinary team that was studying the psychology. And in my research division, we also have like variety of backgrounds, just because housing problem is also a large problem. So yes, find your passion and then apply it. And sometimes you will be surprised where how to apply it in very different fields that you didn't expect that you can make a contribution.
That's a really important point. I mean, climate change and sustainability, they're huge challenges, and to rise to those challenges, we need interdisciplinary teams and multidisciplinary teams. So you don't need necessarily a STEM degree to be able to contribute. This next question from our audience again is, would you say that being the top of your class is a large factor in getting opportunities in labs and in interacting with professors? So how important is being the top of your class, or how important was it for you guys?
I can speak to this a little bit. I think unfortunately there is a little bit of gatekeeping, if I can use that word. Yeah, usually there's a little bit of an advantage, but it's not to say that you can't find these opportunities without good grades, right? But it's kind of going back to that same point. You have to show people why it doesn't matter that you didn't have good grades, because look at this other thing that you were able to do, or look at why you're passionate about this, or these are the other strengths, right? So it's not just about good grades. And if someone tells you that, then they're not the people that you should be to progressing in your life with, right? Like I think most people understand this. So don't make people let you feel like that. Like you got to just understand your strengths and say, this is what I have to offer. and go from that conversation in that space.
So grades may give you an edge, but there are many other ways to shine. Would
I
anyone
definitely
else
agree.
like to chime in?
Alan, go ahead.
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry. I definitely agree with the sentiment that you don't need good grades to get into a lab. Now, I'm not really sure what this lab means, whether it's to work as a worker, work as a volunteer, or work as a grad student. But if of all of those opportunities, I think there's two parts to it. One part is if you're coming from an anonymous background applying in as a position for your work or for a grad student position, that does mostly require, I guess you would call grades and achievements and whatnot. But once you start getting to, this is why I think it's really important to have those connections with professors, is once you start getting to know them, they really don't mind letting you work even if your grades aren't, the top of the class. It's just simply because they know that you are passionate about it, and they believe that if they work with you, you will get through the grad school. And that's all they really need, is that they know that you are capable of persevering. And that's
I
where the resilience
guarantee,
piece comes in. I really like that.
and I guarantee many of those professors were not top of their class either. So they're certainly more open than we might think. Maybe one last question, again from the Q&A, and this one is from a PhD student who's wondering if you could share insights on how they could find internships or a co-op program. So this is for someone who's already in grad school and maybe looking to gain more experience.
I can definitely make a suggestion from my own personal experience. Take a look at programs that are already in place that you fit into. So one of the biggest things that helped me transition from academia to industry was microbial. If you haven't heard of them, take a look. There are opportunities, I think, out there because this connection needs to be made. So there's resources and there's support systems out there. So if you haven't heard of that one, please do look into it. And there's got to be more than that. So that would be my practical advice. Look for those opportunities.
Excellent. So programs like MyTax can definitely help explore new opportunities when you're already in grad school. And then another one that just came in, and I think we still have a couple of minutes to go. So how do you prepare for that shift from academia into industry? What were the greatest challenges or things that were unexpected? Graham, I'm wondering if you have any insight into this. Was there anything that surprised you when you shifted into industry?
Yeah, I mean, one, I would say don't feel like you have to be perfectly studied on how to be an industry professional right away. I think generally speaking, when you go into industry, everyone has this understanding that you're new and you're going to make a couple of mistakes, but usually they're not huge. As long as you put your best foot forward and you have your best intentions in mind, it's not the end of the world. I know for me, like I mentioned, I started getting some of that communication experience in the lab, but then when I went into industry, that was huge for me. Learning how you interact with people around the office, learning how you ask for help, how often to talk to people, learning that you don't have to do everything yourself, and actually when you have too much to do, you're supposed to ask other people and then they will come and help you. That's not something I ever got to do in academia, but it totally happens. It totally happens in industry. So yeah, generally speaking, it's just learn to be a little bit more communicative and ask questions because people are willing to help.
There can be a little bit of a culture shock, but that open communications and listening, asking for help basically can get you a long way. Excellent. Well, with that, I think we will have to wrap up. Thank you to everyone in the audience who submitted questions to the Q&A. They were wonderful. I'm really sorry we couldn't get to all of them. And I'd like to thank Nina, Michelle, Alan, and Graham for taking time out of your very busy schedules to come and speak with us about your exciting careers and your experiences through grad school and transitioning into industry. Thanks to all the audience members who joined, and please note that you'll be receiving an email with a link to the recording and a survey in the next couple of days. And by answering the survey, you'll help the CFI improve on the webinars that they offer. And you will also receive an entry to win an iPad. So please fill out that survey. And we would really appreciate it if you could share the link to the recording with friends and fellow students. And with that, I would like to thank you again for attending. Thank you to our panelists, and have a lovely day.